Okay, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and Reginald, owner of TSM, is here with me again. And this time we're going to talk about some League of Legends topics, because a key one that I think played out quite badly in terms of everyone in the community, actually, in the NLCS, was surrounding the visa requirements for NALCS in Season 5, Season 6, because the key difference was in the past, Riot essentially, this is my understanding, just accepted that if the team said they had, paperwork processing, etc., then they just let the players play, and they assumed that, the team will take care of whatever the requirements are for the visa situation. But we had this situation where Riot came out a couple of weeks into the season and basically said every player who is a import player must have the visa already, like a work visa, to be able to play in the NALCS. And if you didn't have it, and so some famous examples were Froggen from Echo Fox, Freeze from Renegades, there's a few different players around the league. And then obviously over in Europe, we had a whole bunch of players where, as a side topic, which we'll get into, it turned out, being Russian, apparently you can't get a visa to work in Germany. So we had all these players who then couldn't play in the LCS. And all of this, people who are watching the interview now might be thinking, well, what does it have to do with Reginald? But the public perception was that you were the person who spearheaded this. So before we get into the details of that, I want to ask this first of all. You're obviously someone who's had import players in your teams ever since Season 4 began, actually, because that's when you came out of the lineup and you brought in Bjergsen. And then in the summer of that season, you got in Amazing, obviously from Germany. So you had 2 foreign players then. Then you had Lost Boy also come along. You had in Season 5... obviously, we had this situation where you brought in Santorian after Amazing had left. So when you had those other players, when you had Bjergsen and Amazing in Season 4, what was the status of their visas? They had work visas?
Yeah, so sorry about that. So yeah, in 2014, I think that was the second split of LCS. Not split, but season, right?
Yeah.
And so at that time, it was really early on in esports. And the rule for LCS at that time was that if you can show that your import had a processing visa, then Riot would allow you to play in the weekly matches. And so when Bjergsen signed in November of the year before, of 2014, because he signed in November and then it went over to January, so that became 2014. He already had a processing visa before his match start, and that's why we made our best efforts to get the visa right away. And the rule was that when it was fully processed, then he has to go and get it. So that's why I subbed in and played for those 2 weeks. So we filed for the visa on the very first week that he joined. And at that time, there are 2 options you can go about visas, right? You can either get them premium processed or processed at the standard time. And how it works is that if you get a premium processed visa, then the government or I forgot the term of that sector of the people that approve the visa, but they have to respond within 14 days when you file the visa. And what I mean by respond is they have to basically tell you like if your visa is approved within 14 days or why it was rejected. Yeah. And if it is rejected, then they give you like the specific reasons and solutions on how you can file it the next time and reapply to make sure that you get your visa. And the standard way of filing a visa means you file for the visa, and it takes them anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks, and I would say 30 days max for them to reply. And then if your visa is denied, then they can spend another 30 days. So most teams that were really serious about getting their players visas quickly got them premium processed, which was a method that we used for every single player. And so just to clarify, in 2014, the rule was that if you had a processed visa in place where you can show documentation, then your player is allowed to play. And then when it hit 2015, the rules became that you needed to have a valid visa before even playing at all. So it needed to be filed, fully processed, and recognized by the government in order for you to compete in the LCS.
I mean, I think that was 2016, but yeah, I know what you mean in that sense. Okay, so then the other players that you had before 2016, so you had Amazing, you had Santorin, these players all had visas, these all had processing visas?
So in 2014, Bjergsen and Amazing had processing visas, and in 2015, Riot wasn't public about it, but they are very clear to every single organization in LCS that you needed to have a fully processed visa. So they went public about it because organizations were simply not following the rules, even after Riot has walked them through it multiple times. Because you have to keep in mind at that time in 2014, right? The cost of a visa is significant to an organization. You have to remember in 2014, esports was way smaller. I would probably say 4 or 5 times smaller than it is now.
Sure.
So filing for a visa, and if it gets rejected, and if you don't go if you go the premium processing route, it could cost a ton, right? We filed for multiple visas throughout the year, and some would get rejected, and we would have to pay for another amount just to refile it. Some visas only last like 3 months to 2 months, and then you'd have to file for a whole new visa. So a lot of the organizations that didn't do it wanted to avoid that cost.
Okay, so I have a question then about this era when Riot technically allowed people to play before they had an actual proper work visa. Now, obviously I'm no lawyer, so I can't really say this, but my basic understanding is that would not actually be considered allowed if like the government knew about that, right? I mean, famously, with the best case of this was when Dexter tried to join CLG and they saw he was going to come and work in America. They basically like kicked him out, didn't allow him in, and he had to come back. They had to sort of get it all done, the proper paperwork to get him back in, you know. Now, I understand the esports industry has always worked like this because, you know, in the past, a tournament lasted a week. So you're not going to get a work visa for a week. You know, you go to the tournament and it's considered just playing in a competition. So that was never a problem. But if you're going to join a league and you're going to play and you're going to get, you know, weekly salary, monthly salary, whatever it may be, and you're going to play for 2 or 3 months, I'm pretty sure that the American government would consider this like just working, you know. So here's the question. Technically, you know, no one was ever put in jail for this. It was never a problem in that sense. But don't you see it as at all problematic that everyone was sort of getting away with something that probably wasn't okay at the time because of the way Riot allowed it to happen? But then when Riot just decides, right, we're going to stop that now, then it's like then everyone's not allowed to get away with it. I mean, it's kind of like if you were just there a year before, it was okay. Why do you think that's all right?
Well, I don't think it's as black and white, right? Because, well, let me first explain to you so you understand the rules. So even players that just go in for 1 to 2 to 3 days, whether it be, you know, a Smash player, a caster, anyone that lives in Europe that performs services in the U.S. that, you know, is going there to do work, they actually do need a work visa. So it doesn't matter if it's 3 or 4 days versus, you know, staying there for multiple days.
Sure.
The thing is that if you're shown to be malicious and you're doing that with intent, like, you know, intentionally staying there for a really long period of time, then the punishment is just much harsher. So that's actually something that we're constantly learning about. Back in 2014, 2013, none of these organizations had lawyers. No one could afford them, and no one knew that you even needed a work visa until Riot was trying to better the ecosystem, and they reached out like, "Hey guys, you guys are doing it improperly. We want to, you know, take this to the next level. You guys got to be more serious about it." So every single organization started working towards, you know, making like basically professionalizing esports. But we actually ran into the same situation with Luffin. I actually didn't know that you needed a working visa even if you just go in the U.S. for 2 to 3 or 4 days, because he's a Smash player and he lives in Sweden, and he comes in to play Genesis, he comes in to play Evo, he comes in to play these other tournaments. And from my understanding, I thought that was fine because he spends most of his time practicing in Europe, competing and streaming to make his money. And so I didn't know that he needed a working visa. And, you know, if you followed, he got banned from the U.S. for a really long time because he's been actively going to the U.S. to compete in tournaments for a long time now. And so what they did was they look at your history of how many times you've traveled without a working visa, and they punish you based on like what you've done, right? So like a lot of these organizations that don't get visas for their players, the players are actually holding all the liability, and they are actually the ones being damaged. Like if you follow esports, a lot of contracts are just 1 year. So if an organization doesn't get their players visas, then after that year, the organization is not liable, or even within that year, the organization is not liable. So the longer the player is actually in the U.S. competing without a visa, then they can be punished. There's also another point to it too, whereas if your visa is actually being processed, so if your visa just expired but it's being processed and you're in the U.S., it counts as a solid visa until the other visas finally processed or rejected. So there's a lot of like intricate things that has to do with the rules, and I'm learning more and more about it every single day. But for the most part, I think I'm pretty up to date now. After actually, you know, going through multiple processes of being rejected, reapplying, doing premium processing through multiple games. But for the most part, I would say that through my time span of being in the LCS, we followed every single rule that has to do with visas since the beginning of time. And even though Riot, didn't interact with the public about, setting these rules or expectations, these rules and expectations were set and followed by the majority of the teams. Some teams were exceptions that didn't follow it, but they just didn't have to because they didn't want to pay the extra cost. They wanted the competitive advantage because if you pick up an import player 2 to 3 weeks before the season, right, then you're going to lose out in 2 to 3 weeks of practice. If you send the player back to their hometown country, wait for it to be processed, wait for the visa interview, and then go back, you'll be out of 2 to 3 weeks of practice. So a lot of owners actually put that liability onto the player and just have them stay in the U.S. and compete. And they get to practice. Whereas the other organizations that follow the process, they enter the season without any practice. Like if you follow this season right now, not many people know, but going into this season for 2017, I think 3 or 4 organizations are still waiting on their visas, so they aren't going to have a ton of practice time. So the guys that actually don't follow the rules, they have a competitive advantage on the other teams because it's a long season. If you go into the season and you win and you do well at the start, there's momentum and you could continue to compete. Versus the guys that go back to their hometown country, they get tired, they get jet lagged. You have to fly to Korea, you have to fly to Europe, then you have to fly back 3 days before the match. You have to get back, start playing with your team again. And that's why some organizations consciously decide to break the rules for that competitive edge.
Okay. So part of the reason why you came into the story publicly was that the season had begun. I think it was the spring season this year. I can't remember off the top of my head. And when the season began, you made some sort of a tweet that was along the lines of like, how are these guys going to get their visas or something along those lines, right? And then what happened was Riot quite quickly after that moved and made this ruling that some of these people, you had to have a visa, the status already had to be confirmed to play in LCS, so it meant a bunch of these people couldn't. And it was intimated by a bunch of journalists in the scene that Reginald didn't just do a tweet like that. He actually went and said to Riot, these people don't have the visas, I know they don't, and then or Reginald and other people did it. That was the story behind the scenes. So what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I'm being completely honest. I was passive aggressive in my tweet for sure, and the reason being is that 2 things, right? For a long time now, for the last few years, we've been following the rules, and I think most of the organizations actually do follow the rules. And it's really frustrating that these other organizations are putting the liability onto their players, and also they're avoiding monetary costs just to get a competitive edge, right? At the time in 2014, the visa cost was significant to the finances of an organization. 2015, not so much. In 2016, not even close, right? And what I expect out of owners is for them, the esports scene is to be more and more sophisticated as time goes on and on and on, right? If you look at esports 2014, you can't really compare esports 2014 to esports 2016. And at the time the rules were implemented in 2014, most organizations in the LCS did the best they could to follow the rules, and if they didn't, they actively couldn't play. So with that said, in 2016, the expectation is for that to be better. And what I chose to do is that I tried to fix it, internally, but I just didn't see movement, and people were lying. People were lying. People were making sure that they could just practice without actually going through the right process, and I wasn't happy with that. So I wanted to make it public, similar to the Biofrost situation where he wasn't getting paid, and I tried to solve it internally, and I couldn't do it. So I felt like I wanted to bring it to light because it's been going on for a long time, where organizations aren't paying players, they're not acting appropriately, they're not professionalizing the scene, and I view this instance as the same thing, outside, but even worse, right? So if you look at the Leffen situation, and that was not malicious and intentional, by the way, because most people actually don't know that rule. Even yourself in this interview, you're like, well, going to the U.S. to do a job for 3 to 4 days is much different than staying there for a week or 6 months to perform a service. But from a legal standpoint, to my best of my understanding, it's the same thing. And because Leffen has done that for a long time, he was banned from the U.S., or not banned, but his visa process had to take 90 days of special administration. On top of that, we got rejected the first time too. So we pretty much spent half a year or more not being able to compete in the US. He spent more than half a year not being able to compete in the US because we didn't do it properly, and we didn't intentionally do that. We just didn't know, right? Whereas the organizations in the LCS, they know that they're putting this liability on the players, but they're choosing to do anyways. But there's also one more point, is that if you look at Leffen's case and you look at the LCS case, right, there's one distinct difference. In the LCS, like you said it earlier, players are living in the US for months, if not a year, like 9 months, 10 months. Leffen is just going into the US 3 to 4 days at a time. So the way you'd be punished by doing that and not following the rules, it's just going to come down much harsher with a much harsher punishment. Sorry for not articulating myself correctly, but what I'm trying to get to is that the people in the LCS that are putting this liability onto their players are actually opening up their players to much more liability, and they're also doing it with intent. And that wasn't something I was happy with.
Okay, but let me put it this way, okay? Be all that as it may, that can all be correct. You literally did the same thing as them in the past when the rule wasn't required, right? When you had your visa processing and you had your players play for a few weeks and then go back and get their visa. So even if it is a situation where, yeah, Riot's rules have changed and you correctly have said, right, this person isn't following the rules. So in the sense, you've got a competitive advantage there, by I'm following the rules, so I'll make sure the other person gets punished. People from the outside are going to say, isn't it a bit hypocritical if you yourself benefited from the same thing in the past?
Well, that's not necessarily true, because you have to give the timeline, right? So I could see it from their perspective where I come off as hypocritical, but you can't compare like an 18-year-old doing something bad to a 7-year-old doing something bad. And I would say that in 2 years of esports, it's a lifetime. Back in 2014, it just came down to every single organization, and even yourself to today, not knowing the specifics of how the rules are supposed to be followed. And at that time, we were not sophisticated. We were just starting our business. And, it was me. It was like all the owners in esports at the time were really junior. They didn't know this. So they looked at Riot for a lot of help in terms of clarification. And even with our lawyer at that time, he explained to me that, like, there are consequences to this, and you can't pay your players while they're there. You have to make sure payments are your contracts and payments are structured in a specific way. I don't want to go to how my contracts are structured at the time. You have to make sure that they're not performing a service for you. So you'd have to pay them beforehand and basically contract them out in a certain way. But for the most part, yeah, I agree with you. It could be seen as hypocritical, but I don't think it's fair to compare 2014 esports to 2016 esports, or even compare 2014 esports to 2012 esports, right? It's light years different, At that time also, I do also think there's a difference between knowing and not knowing.
Okay. So another reason why the fact that you were the person who took part in reporting this.
Okay, can I say one more thing too?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you have to see it from this perspective too, right? There are consequences with it. And actually, can you just finish your question and then I'll answer?
Right. Okay, so one of the issues with the fact that people saw that you were one of the people alerting Riot to this, making sure it was known, trying to get other people this rule enforced for them, is behind the scenes, Echo Fox was a new team, okay? Rick Fox was a new owner, and obviously just because he's a very charismatic person, people wanted his team to do really well, and they think this is a really good guy coming in the scene, etc. And so the problem is, the perception was that Rick Fox came to a lot of the LCS teams, is what I heard, and he talked to different teams, and he was asking them, I'm new in this space, what do I do with this? How do I make it? He obviously never had a team before, he never had an organization, didn't know much about esports. And so the perception was that he'd asked for advice around the scene, including perhaps yourself, and that then you and others come out and tell Riot, this guy isn't following the rules. And so people think, right, you essentially had the knowledge, you knew from talking to him, he hasn't got his visas, and you waited until the season started, and you were like, right, wait, the season started. And now Riot, look, he hasn't got his visa, and then fucked him over. That's the perception publicly.
Well, I mean, I can give you a breakdown of what happened. So I did have conversations with Rick, but it was mainly before he bought into the LCS. And generally when people go to me about esports advice, and there are interested parties joining the LCS, I give them advice, and most of the advice was around what players you should look at, what the ecosystem is like, and ultimately if he should join or not. And I advised him to join because I thought that it was going to grow, and it did grow. And most of our talks was around whether he should be a part of LCS or not. But regardless of that, none of our conversation was around the process of like anything visa related. When you do become a new owner in the LCS, Riot not only does a background check, but they have a policy where they walk through all the rules and all the best practices of how an owner should operate within the ecosystem. So what that means is Rick probably met with someone at Riot where they walked them through all the rules, through from like starting from poaching to tampering to announcing to getting the right visas, etc. So from my understanding, he had the full entire breakdown of what he should do and how he should operate in the ecosystem. And as new owners come to the scene and as they, as you see more sophisticated owners join the scene, I expect them to raise the level of how teams should operate, right? And with that said, he knew that he should get those visas. He had lawyers. He has a full staff of people that work with him on Echo Fox. So there's no reason why he should not get the visas for his players.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a professional owners group, and I would say out of all the LCS teams, Echo Fox is owned and managed by some of the most professional people in esports.
So it not only did Echo Fox and Renegades, have certain star players not able to play because they were their import players, but an unexpected knock-on effect of this that actually I don't think anyone could have anticipated was that it turned out over in the European LCS that players like Diamond Prox, Edward, basically the players who used to be in Moscow 5 and Gambit, what we didn't know at the time was, because of the way the European Union works, for some reason in Germany, if you actually were from Russia, or I'm not quite sure, I think Russia, Edward's from like Armenia or something, I'm not quite sure, one of those countries. If you were from one of these countries, actually it turned out you couldn't get a work visa in Germany because of some, the rules are too complicated to go into, but just take my word for it, anyone who's listening to the interview, you just couldn't get it, okay? And so it turned out it wasn't just that they needed to apply, they actually couldn't. They tried to and they couldn't get it. And so as a result, those players just have never been seen in LCS again. So even though obviously you could not have known that was going to happen, it meant that you and the other people who reported its visa issue, it had more of an effect than just taking out one team or one player, It actually had quite a widespread effect on both LCS divisions. Like, what do you think of that? I mean, is there anything that bothers you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a disappointing chain of events that happened, and it really sucks that the players weren't able to compete. So first off, I do feel really bad for what happened to those players, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind that that those organizations should not have been allowed to let those players compete in the first place. Second thing is that I'm actually not too familiar with how visas work in Germany, so I can't comment. And so until we get someone that understands how visas and employment law works in Germany, it's really hard to come down to a conclusion with it, right? The rules are there for a specific reason, not only in the LCS, but the law, right? But what I can do is comment on North America, and what I can do is comment on how I feel about this situation. And ultimately, it comes down to, at the end of the day, how esports is going to grow. And with that said, I personally think that it was definitely the right approach. But because if you look at it, the consequences are all, like, if you look at the liability and the consequences, everything is basically put onto the player in this situation, right? If I pick up players and
Sure.
they don't have visas, what's going to happen is that the longer the time they spend in the U.S., the harsher they're going to get punished. So had I kept a player in the LCS in the U.S. for a year without filing a visa for him, what's actually going to happen is the government's probably going to go down much harsher on those LCS players versus the Leffen case. We're not just looking at 6 months. We can be looking at years. We can be looking at a permanent ban. And so I felt like a few weeks is much better than 6 months, 9 months, even a year plus of being completely blackballed from competing in a league. And I do think that that's better for the players' careers long term. I think that's better also for the LCS long term, is that these organizations start following the rules from the very beginning. I can't comment on why these organizations made the decision they chose to make, because I simply don't know, and assuming would just wouldn't make sense. But for the most part, if like I said earlier, these organizations are not taking any risk at all when they aren't having the right visas, outside of not being able to have those players compete. If they are professional, if they are thinking long term, they should get visas for the players. It costs, in this current day, it would cost $2,500 to get the visas premium processed. They would have to respond within 2 weeks. It's not a hard process. Most of the teams in all of LCS, they go through the right process, and they go through the right channels to do it. And it's simply just doing it. And so there's no excuse. We are educated on this process, and we're reminded every single split and every single year to do this. There's no reason why these organizations should not do them. And, like you said earlier, comparing 2014 teams to the teams that are in the LCS now, there's just a major difference. Like, you look at 2014, or was it 2013, you saw like Marn, you saw TSM, you saw CLG, you saw, I can't even remember all the organizations back then, but it's completely different now, and they're all backed by major professional groups. Immortals, Energy, they went into the LCS, and they were able to do it. They were able to get visas in time. They made sure to do it. They were educated by Riot. Riot walked them through the whole entire process of what they should do, and they did it. There's no reason why any of these other teams have an excuse.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. As the final words, do you have anything you want to wrap up with? I mean, you've said a lot of it, but is there any final note you want to hit?
Well, I mean, I just want your opinion over Thorin, because at the start of this interview, obviously you should know, right? Only the people that actually have to go through this process should understand it. But what's your opinion on this whole topic? Do you think it's fair for the players to take the liability, or should the owners do it?
No. Here's the thing. I certainly do think that's a problem, because, for example, I mean, you didn't necessarily say this explicitly, but a key problem obviously is that, say I'm an owner and I get a player, and then he does get caught, and then the government says you're banned for 6 months. Actually, most teams will probably, unless he's like the best player in the world, will probably just be like, you know what, I think we'll just drop this player, we'll get another player and get him in instead. So yeah, it would only be the player who got fucked over in that sense. I mean, the team in a sense, because they wouldn't be able to use him, but it would be much worse for the player's career than it would be for the team. They can always get a new player, whereas that player, he's himself, so he's stuck with himself and his problems with the visa situations. That is certainly an issue. My whole issue is, I just think in itself that a lot of the blame for this actually probably has to go to Riot Store, because if they were already a big company by the time LCS started, they should have already had lawyers looking into this stuff, and they probably should have never let anyone compete without real visas all in place. They should never should have left the window open where someone could get some sort of an issue like this, because it's one thing for you, okay, if you're following the rules of Riot, and then Riot changes the rules, and so you definitely, everyone has to follow those rules. But it's not like the rules of the government themselves have changed over the last 3 years. People in 2015 shouldn't have been coming over for 3 months, playing, clearly just doing a job, making salary in that, and then pretending like they're there on a tourist visa. That's my problem, is I think that's kind of unethical. And so that's not really an issue to do with you or a team,
I agree with you in that sense. They should definitely structure their pay in a way where they are not on a tourist visa, and they're what they could do is they can offer to pay the players more in the 6 month time span. It just gives the organization more risk, so they can just pay the players with a shorter term contract when the visa actually starts, and just have them travel over to the US and really not compete and just practice with the team. But from my perspective, though, I do feel like Riot went through all the necessary steps to make sure that the owners were fully aware of what they needed to do. And I mean, I'm not going to go on a white knight and defend Riot, right? But I felt like they in this situation specifically, they did take the heat for it when they didn't actually change the rules just overnight on the organizations, but it was actually implemented 2015. There are a lot of rules that changed that the owners are fully aware of. That
Sure.
Because we get these emails from Riot on a weekly basis, right? And every single
Sure.
year we get like a quarterly update, a biannual update, and a full annual update. And so all these rules are actually just implemented in 2015, and I guess it just wasn't public knowledge. So people came to a conclusion of, hey, these rules are just implemented now, and I can see it from your perspective. But you have to understand that they are a gaming company, and it's really actually difficult to micromanage 20 LCS teams. That's 20 LCS teams with all their player contracts when they're trying to build up the LCS. So I do think it actually has the liability, or the fault actually falls onto the owners for not operating the right way or the way they should. But
Sure, well, put it this way.
Yeah.
Okay, put it this way. Okay, it's obviously not actually Riot's fault if a team doesn't get a visa for their player. That's the team's fault, and it's the player and the team who will be punished and liable by the government, right? It won't be anything to do with Riot. My point was more that if Riot keep as much control over the players and the teams as they imply they do, and they really, they're able to ask for teams' records and accounts and all these sorts of things, if they knew a team didn't have a visa, then I just think from an ethical point of view, if they really are this company who's trying to follow all the rules, they should have reported it in that sense, and then it should be down to the players and the teams. So that's really a separate issue. I will say one thing though, which is that one thing I've learned in esports over the last few years is in the past, whenever there was something that was done that was like someone breaking a rule, because it was always just like an organizer's rule or a tournament rule, then everyone can have an opinion and everyone can roughly know what they're talking about, right? But I've noticed when it's anything that's actually legally based, if you ever talk to a lawyer, there's a reason why lawyers exist, because it's super complicated and there's like a million different variables and all
They're
different
also
like,
expensive.
That's the whole point, right? So the problem is, as an outsider, I've noticed you never really can know the details of the legal stuff, because that's the whole reason why those guys get paid so much and why it's such a complicated area, because usually there are a million different variables and it's never usually black and white. I've noticed it's always like you have to build a certain case and it has to look a certain way. So I have to say myself, I've just learned over the last few years to not take such a hard line on some of those topics,
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think that because this industry is still young and new, a lot of people just don't know what they're doing. But I do think for the most part, the people that do know, they should try their best to follow the right approach and, do the right thing. But for the most part, it's really hard to tell because so much of this, so much of the conversation is done privately that you don't really know if the Riot actually knows or not, right? Because an organization can very well just say, yeah, it's filed, it's processed.
Yeah, sure.
And that's it. That's such a random thing to lie about. So, but now we have to send in all of our visas and everything. So it's all squared away. It's done the right way now. And I think in the long run, it's going to be a lot better for the players' careers. But I can see why I got a lot of negative press around the situation, because there just wasn't enough information about it. And then the second thing also was that it honestly really is unfortunate for the European players that could not compete. And, I'm willing to help front some of the costs to fix that. So if European players need help or advice, what I can do is I can help pay for a lawyer, actually, to make sure that they know the right steps in order to get the visas in Europe if they need help. Now, I can't do that for everyone. I can, if I do that for like one or two people, then we'll understand the process and we can help educate the community to do that. And I'm completely fine with doing that. But I'm certain there's actually ways to do it. I just think that people were being lazy and they didn't want to pay for it. So, and you guys can hold me to it. The first 5 players that reach out to me, I will help them. Okay. I'll help them. I'll help educate them. I'll point them to my lawyers, and I'll cover the cost. Because the shitty thing about all of this, dude, is that the cost of getting a visa is really expensive. And at the end of the day, once the player leaves the organization and they're punished for not having a visa by the government, that most of the time they're not going to be able to solve this situation by themselves unless they're a superstar and they're sought out after by another organization. Sure. So with that said, hey, thanks a ton for doing this interview with me, clarifying this up. Appreciate it. And yeah,